Good morning. So great to have everyone here this morning. It's nice to be on the front of the program this time instead of the back. Last time I got the last 5 minutes of the program, so it's nice to be on the front this time. Would like to kind of open this morning kind of with a 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to do here in corrections, and kind of looking at what some of the challenges are. And it really kind of comes down to a very old fundamental argument that's been going on for generations, which is the primary purpose of prison punishment, punitive, are they penitentiaries, or is the primary mission corrections? And there's this argument's been going on for a very, very long time in this country. And people kind of fall one way or another on this, whether they've done it consciously or unconsciously, in trying to look at what our laws should be, what the purpose is, what the mission of corrections should be. And when there's a duality, it's a very difficult thing to try to move forward. We see a lot of times certain policies come out, and one half of the room says, hey, take the key and lock them up. The other half of the room says, no, we need to be putting these programs into place. And so I really kind of wanted to take a moment to have this conversation. What do we really believe? Because if we can't come to some general consensus on this, we can't move the agenda forward, which is why the agenda hasn't moved forward in this state for a very long time. Because there's been this mixed message of take the key and lock them up, make the prisons, strip them down, no rights, remove their rights, kind of mindset, which is a very punitive penal system. And yet we call it the Department of Corrections. And so, kind of looking at that, we go, well, what is the message here? What are we trying to achieve? If we are looking simply as a penal system, then there's no need for these conversations. We just lock everybody up and we keep paying to do it. Build more prisons, hire more guards, we're done. If our issue is rehabilitation and corrections, we must then ask ourselves, how well are we doing in correcting behaviors? What services, what treatments are we offering that are going to make our community safer? It's very interesting, as I mentioned, this duality. I came across something recently. I'd like to share it with you. It's actually out of the Florida criminal punishment codes. And there's several codes here, and I'm not going to bore you with the 8-2- whatever, but if you're interested, I'll be glad to provide this to you. But here's what our state says about our system. It says, the stated policy of the Criminal Punishment Code is to punish miscreants for their crimes. The code goes on to state further, the first purpose of sentencing is to punish, not rehabilitate. Whether there is any redeeming value to the criminal in sending him to prison is largely a secondary concern. It goes on to say rehabilitation is a secondary goal, and it is stated policy that a defendant's sentence should increase with the length and nature of the defendant's prior record. It is obvious that prison will always be detrimental to one's future, even if it is essential to the appropriate punishment. Most of this was written in 2011. So this isn't like old stuff on the books. So this is the message. And this is the duality that we're dealing with. In addition to that, we've kind of broken up into silos on this issue. And law enforcement on this part, and providers on this part, and this on this part, legislators kind of over here, and we've not really sat at the table to have the kind of discussions that we need to have. But we first have to settle the fundamental issue of corrections and make that message very clear. Whether we like it or not, 30,000 inmates are going to get out this year. This is always something that always surprises me in having conversations, because when you start to want to talk about something like sex offenders, boy, do you get a shutdown, okay? And particularly if you talk to legislators, and no offense to the legislators in the room, but they don't want to hear it, okay? Maybe if they're nonviolent, drug addiction, maybe, okay? But here's the problem. Whether we like it or not, they're getting out. Whether we like it or not, they're in our communities. Okay? And the problem that we're having is there's so many gaps in services to these guys that we're continuing to set them up for failure. And the general mindset is, let's try to find some place where we can lock them up forever. And in one way or another, our state is pushing to life sentences for sex offenders. But in the meantime, they're getting out and they're living under a bridge. Or they're totally unemployable. Or they can't go back to their home because it's too close to a school. Now, please understand, okay, that, I have children. I don't want sex offenders in my neighborhood any more than anybody else does, okay? I get the argument, I do. But I also know that when I put my zip code in the little thing and pull up how many sex offenders are in my neighborhood, there's a whole load of them. And so the question becomes, how do I want them in my community? Do I want them destitute with no services, set up for failure, or do I want them in an environment that's supporting potential success? And this is the question we have to ask across the board to all of the different groups of offenders. There's not one easy answer. And when you look at this population of 30,000 coming out, there's geriatrics in this group, there's sex offenders, there's violence, there's drug addictions, there's mental health. Here's another one of these issues, mental health. Florida's worked very hard to be number 49, okay? But we're paying the consequences. How long are we going to listen to news reports of guys throwing their kids over bridges or doing... How long are we going to stand by as a society in Florida and say, this is okay? And anyone that's here in corrections knows that correctional systems have become our psychiatric wards. You can't run a jail, you can't run a prison without being a psych specialist anymore. So we have to look at that and go, this is unacceptable. Because now we've got a population that the criminal justice system is having thrown on them that they're not prepared to address, and they're not getting the services they need, and they're exiting prison without these services. But they're exiting prison. Okay? So whether, again, wherever you fall on this, you have to look at this and say, they're coming out. Okay? It's always kind of funny when you're having, and talking about an issue, because really what you have to believe in corrections. If you're believing in rehabilitation, you have to believe that a person can actually change. That with the right programs, the right tools, the right follow-up, that you can actually change a behavior. But you'd be surprised how fundamentally most people really don't believe that. Okay? And it's very hard, too, when you've been a victim, not to really want to advocate for locking somebody up forever. Okay? When it's been, your issue. A funny kind of, well, it's not a funny story, but I had a situation when we're talking about what do we really believe. Back years ago, about 15, almost 20 years ago, my house was broken into while I was in the home. I was a single woman living in a home, and the house was being burglarized in the middle of the night while I was in the house. Now, that was a terrifying experience for me. And thank God law enforcement was there and arrested the guy. And of course, my mind went to all the things that could have happened. You really go through quite an experience when you've had, your space violated in that way. A few months later, I get a phone call, and it's from a probation officer, and he says, Mrs. Brown, we have a situation where there was a gentleman that the judge sentenced to the bridge. Now, the Orlando Bridge has a court diversion program. He said, the thing is as I was looking at his record, I saw that you're the victim. And he said, we felt the need to call you and, kind of give you the right to make a decision about whether or not this guy should come to your program. Now, the victim in me immediately went, put that guy in jail, keep him there forever. That judge had no right sentencing him somewhere else. But I had to go back to what do I believe? And what I knew was that if I had said, no, you cannot do this. We were the only diversion program at that time in Orange County. There was no other place for him to go. He would have either stayed in the prison or gone on to a corrections or gone back into the community. But in any case, he wouldn't have been any better for the experience. And what I knew was the only help this guy could possibly get was to be able to come into our program. And so I had to get over it and say, you know what? He needs to come. Okay? And when I was asked by some of the staff why I made that decision, here was my answer. Because I don't want there to be any more victims. Okay? I don't want anybody else to go through having this man break into their home for drug money. And the only way we're going to prevent that is to offer these people services that might interrupt their behaviors and their patterns and their thinking and help them be successful back in the community. Now, the data's all there. For years and years, I've advocated for the substance abuse data that clearly shows. We don't get them all, but we get a large number of them. And I'm not just speaking as a individual provider. I'm talking about a collective provider of not only services for treatment, but for mental health, for sex offense, for all of it. Okay? We have to look at education and vocation. This becomes another big piece. We've clearly seen that when these men and women have a higher education, less recidivism. When they have a marketable job skill, less recidivism. Something just as simple as that. And by the way, this is a big crossover with juvenile justice as well, because the data goes not only into the adult system, but the juvenile justice system as well. We've got to make the agreement or come to an agreement that a safer Florida, a more efficient way of spending tax money, is not to continue to build prisons, but to work with the populations that we have and divert them from coming back into the system. We need to look at whether they need to be in the system to start with, because we've made an awful lot of things illegal, and small amounts of drugs, doing big time, and other things that aren't necessarily what needs to be done. There are a significant population that can benefit from diversion programs. And we need to look at those, but then those that do need to be in a correctional environment, we really need to look at it as corrections and understand that the responsibility is ours, not theirs. We have to provide these programs, and not just in a small percentage, but in a large percentage. Okay? Think about it this way. 30,000 inmates coming out, we're about turning over the prison population every 3 years. It's always surprising to people to hear that the average sentence is 2.7 years. I mean, we're not talking about mass murders here. We're not talking about the guys that get the headlines. That's actually a very small percentage. And when you look at the resources that are dedicated for these populations, quite honestly, it states a message for Florida that I don't believe Floridians really want to have, which is that we don't care about our citizens. And ultimately, the safety of our citizens, because law enforcement can't do it alone. If these guys continue to go out and commit crimes, continue, this constant cycle, and their resources are tapped as well. There's just not enough law enforcement, there's not enough jail space, there's not enough court dockets, there's not enough of anything. It really becomes an issue of safety, and we really need to look at that as a message, not being soft on crime, but what's smart. What can we do smarter, better, and more effective with our taxpayers' dollars that are ultimately going to make our communities safer? Now, conferences like this are a first start. And we've got a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds here, and we're not always going to agree on all the same issues. But what we have to agree on is to find that common ground. What we need to agree on is that we need to come to the table and stay at the table until we figure out a plan for moving this state forward. It is tragic when crime is going down and our prison population is going up. Something is wrong here. When Florida is the only state that's got its population going up, something is wrong here. And we've got to be willing to come together from all of our silos and from all of our different belief systems and agree to come together for solutions. In the course of this conference, there's going to be a lot of different workshops addressing a lot of different areas of corrections. And they've set it up this year to break it apart into some smaller, intimate groups. And the reason for this is so that real conversations can take place. And I really encourage you guys to get knee-deep into these conversations and talk about what's working and talk about what's not working. And then when we can get a collective agenda, we need to continue to push that agenda. And this is also why I'm so excited about the legislative presence here, because a lot of things in here need to be fixed legislatively. But a lot of it needs to be fixed in revamping our systems and revamping the way we're thinking. And legislation can't do that. So I leave you with this thought. What if? What if we could write our criminal statutes to say something different? I'll propose a little language here. The primary purpose of sentencing is to manage criminal adjudications in a way that promotes public safety and victim security. Rehabilitation and punishment are co-equal goals of sentencing, and thus sentences shall be pronounced with due consideration as to how that balance will shape the offender's eventual interaction with society. Societal concerns are paramount in criminal justice. Thank you.